Elliot Barrington, a wealthy real estate mogul, thought he had everything, until Lea Grant, a former teacher with a knack for solving chaos, stepped into his life as a nanny. From tantrums to golf tournaments, their world collides in ways neither expected. But as secrets unravel and social circles close in, can love rewrite the rules of their lives? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun shone through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elliot Barrington's penthouse apartment. At 42 years old, he had everything money could buy. The most expensive address in the city, a collection of luxury cars, and a reputation as one of the most successful real estate developers on the East Coast. But right now, none of that mattered as he desperately tried to get his 5-year-old son Max ready for school. "Max, please put your shoes on," Elliot said, checking his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. "We're going to be late." "No, I want Mommy to take me." Max crossed his arms and stomped his foot, his backpack thrown carelessly on the marble floor. Elliot ran his hands through his perfectly styled dark hair, feeling his patience wearing thin. This was exactly why he needed to hire someone to help with Max. His ex-wife Amanda had primary custody, but on the weeks Max stayed with him, mornings were pure chaos. "Your mother is in Paris for a fashion show," Elliot explained, trying to keep his voice calm. "You're staying with Daddy this week, remember?" Max's lower lip trembled, and Elliot braced himself for what was coming. The tantrum that followed could probably be heard 3 floors down. Just then his phone buzzed. It was Caroline, his assistant. "Mr. Barrington, the first nanny candidate is here for the interview." "Send her up," Elliot said, relief flooding through him. He'd interviewed 5 nannies already this month, and none had been right. They were either too young, too intimidated by his wealth, or too eager to become the next Mrs. Barrington. The elevator doors opened, and Elliot turned, expecting another 20-something with stars in her eyes. Instead, he saw a woman in her mid-30s, dressed simply but professionally in a blue blazer and black pants. She had warm brown eyes and carried herself with quiet confidence. "Mr. Barrington, I'm Lea Grant." She smiled, then immediately turned her attention to Max, who was still mid-tantrum on the floor. Instead of looking shocked or judgmental, she knelt down to his level. "Hi there," she said softly. "Those look like pretty cool superhero socks you've got on. I bet they'd look even better inside some shoes, don't you think?" Max paused his crying, looking at her with curiosity. "They're Spider-Man socks," he said between sniffles. "Spider-Man, he's my favorite too." Lea reached into her bag and pulled out a small toy car. "You know, I brought this with me because I heard you like cars. Would you like to show me your collection while we put your shoes on?" To Elliot's amazement, Max nodded and started walking toward his room, completely forgetting his earlier protest. "That was impressive," Elliot said, watching his son actually cooperate with a stranger. "Children just need to feel heard," Lea replied. "Even during tantrums, they're trying to tell us something." Elliot raised an eyebrow. This wasn't the usual nanny speak he'd heard in other interviews. "Your resume says you were a teacher." "Yes, for 10 years, 3rd grade. But I recently decided I wanted to work more closely with individual children, really make a difference in their lives." She met his gaze directly, without the nervous flutter he usually saw from job candidates. "And you're okay with the salary we discussed? It's less than you'd make teaching." He watched her carefully, looking for signs of ulterior motives. "Money isn't everything, Mr. Barrington. What matters is doing work that matters." There was something in her tone that made him feel like she was gently challenging his values, and it irritated him. Before he could respond, Max came running back with his shoe collection, eagerly showing them to Lea. She listened intently as he described each one, somehow managing to get him to put on a pair while they talked. "Well," Elliot said, checking his watch again, "we need to get going. The school doesn't like late arrivals." "Of course." Lea stood up. "It was nice meeting you both." As she walked toward the elevator, Max tugged on Elliot's sleeve. "Daddy, I like her. Can she stay?" Elliot watched as Lea pressed the elevator button, noting how she carried herself with dignity despite his somewhat dismissive attitude. She wasn't what he'd expected at all. "Caroline," he called his assistant, "cancel the other interviews. Tell Ms. Grant she starts tomorrow." Later that evening, at his regular table in the city's most exclusive restaurant, Elliot sat with his usual crowd. Fellow millionaires who measured success in square footage and stock prices. "So you finally hired a nanny?" James Preston, his oldest friend and biggest rival, swirled his $1,000 scotch. "Let me guess, young, blonde, desperate to climb the social ladder?" Elliot thought about Leila's steady gaze and unimpressed demeanor. "Actually, no, she's different." "Different how?" James leaned forward, always eager for gossip. "She's a former teacher, seems more interested in Max than in the lifestyle." Elliot shrugged, trying to seem casual about it. "Boring," James declared. "But speaking of lifestyle, you're coming to the charity golf tournament next month, right? Everyone who's anyone will be there." "Of course." Elliot nodded, already thinking about which clients he could impress at the event. "You should bring her," James said with a smirk. "The help is usually serving drinks, not playing golf. It could be entertaining." Elliot felt a flash of discomfort at James's tone, but he pushed it aside. After all, Lea was just the nanny. "Maybe I will," he said, raising his glass. "Could be interesting." As he drove home that night in his Ferrari, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important, but he pushed the thought away, just like he always did when reality threatened to crack his perfect facade. Little did he know, his carefully constructed world was about to be turned upside down by the very woman he'd dismissed as just the nanny. Lea Grant arrived at the Barrington penthouse exactly at 7 the next morning. She'd ironed her clothes twice, wanting to look professional without trying to compete with the luxury surrounding her. As she stepped out of the elevator, she heard crashes coming from the kitchen, followed by Max's voice yelling, "No breakfast!" She found Elliot in his pristine kitchen, wearing an expensive suit now splattered with orange juice, trying to convince Max to eat something. The little boy had apparently knocked over his glass and was refusing to sit at the table. "Good morning," Lea said calmly, setting down her bag. "Mind if I jump in?" Elliot stepped back, frustration evident on his face. "Be my guest." Instead of trying to force Max to eat, Lea sat down at the table herself. She pulled out a small container from her bag and started eating what looked like colorful fruit arranged in a fun pattern. Max stopped his protest to watch her. "What's that?" "Oh, this? Just my breakfast. I like to make faces with my food sometimes, see? The strawberries make a smile and the blueberries are eyes." She took a bite. Delicious." "Can I try?" Max asked, his earlier tantrum forgotten. "Of course, why don't we make one together?" Lea looked at Elliot. "Mr. Barrington, would you have any fruit we could use?" Elliot pointed to the fully stocked refrigerator, trying not to show how impressed he was by her handling of the situation. Within minutes, Max was happily eating his food-face breakfast, all thoughts of rebellion gone. Elliot watched in amazement as his son actually finished everything on his plate. "I have meetings all day," Elliot said, checking his phone. "The school bus comes at 8:30. "Actually," Lea interjected, "I thought I might drive Max to school today. It would give us a chance to get to know each other better, and I could meet his teachers." Elliot frowned. "In what car? The Ferrari isn't exactly child-friendly, and my driver has the day off. I have my own car, Mr. Barrington. It's not luxury, but it's safe and reliable." "A normal car?" Max seemed fascinated by the idea. "Can we really, Daddy?" Elliot hesitated. The thought of his son arriving at his expensive private school in anything less than a luxury vehicle made him uncomfortable. But Max looked so excited. "Fine," he said finally. "But tomorrow, we go back to the usual arrangement." As Elliot left for work, he couldn't help but notice how easily Lea had taken charge of the situation. It bothered him somehow, even though it was exactly what he'd hired her to do. Throughout the day, between meetings about his latest real estate development, Elliot found himself wondering how things were going. He'd never worried about Max during the day before. The previous nannies had always sent constant updates and photos, clearly trying to impress him. But Lea hadn't sent a single message. Finally, around 3 o'clock, his curiosity got the better of him. "Caroline," he called his assistant, "check on Ms. Grant and Max." A few minutes later, Caroline reported back. "They're at the Children's Museum, Mr. Barrington." Apparently Max had mentioned it during their drive to school, and Ms. Grant thought it would be educational. The Children's Museum. Elliot couldn't remember the last time he'd taken Max anywhere. That didn't have a VIP section. Did she clear this with anyone? The school schedule you provided shows this is Max's free afternoon, Caroline reminded him. And Ms. Grant has full authority to plan activities. When Elliot arrived home that evening, he found Max excitedly showing off a robot he'd built at the museum. The apartment was filled with the smell of home cooking. Another surprise. Mrs. Grant made dinner, Max announced. Real dinner, not from the fancy place. Elliot looked at the simple but appetizing meal laid out on the kitchen island. You cook too? Nothing fancy, Layla said, helping Max wash his hands. But I believe children should have home-cooked meals when possible, and Max helped. He's quite good at stirring. I'm a chef now, Max declared proudly. As they sat down to eat, Elliot noticed something he hadn't seen in a long time. Max was happy, relaxed, and actually eating his vegetables without argument. How was the children's museum? He asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. It was awesome. We learned about space and robots and dinosaurs. Max could barely contain his excitement. And Layla knew everything. She's so smart, Daddy. Elliot watched as Layla gently reminded Max to use his napkin, noting how natural she was with him. No forced cheerfulness or obvious attempts to win favor, just genuine care and attention. Later, after Max was in bed, Elliot found Layla preparing to leave for the day. About the museum, he started. In the future, I'd prefer if you ran these things by me first. Layla turned to face him. With all due respect, Mr. Barrington, you hired me to care for Max and make decisions about his daily activities. If you'd like to be consulted about every detail, perhaps you'd be more comfortable with a different arrangement? Her direct response caught him off guard. The other nannies would have immediately apologized and promised to do better. That's not what I meant, he said, backtracking slightly. I'm not used to someone putting Max's needs first. Layla's voice was kind but firm. He's a wonderful little boy, Mr. Barrington. He doesn't need expensive toys or fancy cars. He just needs attention, consistency, and love. Before Elliot could respond, his phone buzzed. It was James Preston. Don't forget, golf tournament next Saturday, and bring the nanny. I already told everyone about her. James's tone was full of mischief. Time to see how she handles the real elite of society. After hanging up, Elliot looked at Layla, who was gathering her things to leave. She had no idea what she was about to walk into, and part of him felt guilty about what he was about to do. Ms. Grant, he called out, how's your golf game? Layla looked at Elliot with surprise. My golf game? I haven't played in years. Why do you ask? There's a charity tournament at Pine Valley Country Club next Saturday. I'd like you to come. Elliot tried to sound casual, but there was something in his voice that made Layla suspicious. A charity tournament at the most exclusive club in the city? She raised an eyebrow. Why would you want your son's nanny there? Max will be there. His mother is coming too. Elliot wasn't exactly lying. Amanda had RSVP'd, though she rarely showed up to these events. It would be good to have you around. Layla studied his face for a moment. Mr. Barrington, I may be just the help, but I'm not naive. What's the real reason? Before Elliot could answer, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a group message from James to their entire social circle. Saturdays. Entertainment is confirmed. Barrington's bringing his charity case Nanny, taking bets on how long before she runs crying. Elliot's face reddened as he realized Layla had seen the message preview on his phone screen, which was still lit up on his desk. I see, Layla said quietly. I'm to be the entertainment. It's not like that, Elliot started, but Layla cut him off. Actually, Mr. Barrington, I'll accept. Her voice was steady, though her eyes flashed with determination. But not for the reason you think. The next morning, Layla arrived as usual, acting as if nothing had happened. She got Max ready for school without any tantrums, packed his lunch, and even helped him practice his reading. Elliot watched her, feeling increasingly uncomfortable about the upcoming tournament. He tried to focus on work, but his mind kept wandering to the previous night's conversation. At his office later that day, James and their other friends were still laughing about their planned entertainment. I heard she drives some old Japanese car, one of them snickered. Can you imagine that pulling up to Pine Valley? Now, James said with fake generosity. Maybe she'll surprise us. Maybe she's secretly a golf pro who's just working as a nanny for fun. Their laughter was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Caroline, Elliot's assistant, with some unexpected news. "Mr. Barrington, your ex-wife is here." Amanda swept into the office in a cloud of expensive perfume, her designer, heels clicking on the marble floor. "Elliot, darling, we need to talk about this new nanny." Elliot's friends quickly made excuses to leave, not wanting to get involved in ex-wife drama. Once they were alone, Amanda's perfectly made-up face broke into a genuine smile. Max called. "Me last night," she said, sitting down. "Do you know what he talked about for 20 minutes straight? Science experiments and dinosaurs. He hasn't been this excited about anything in ages." "The Children's Museum," Elliot muttered. "Exactly. And this morning, his teacher emailed me. Apparently, Max participated in class discussion for the first time in weeks. He's actually doing his homework without fighting." Amanda leaned forward. "What I want to know is, why are you trying to humiliate this woman at the golf tournament?" Elliot stared at his ex-wife. "How did you—" "Please, darling, everyone's talking about it. The big joke. Watch the nanny embarrass herself at Pine Valley." Amanda's voice hardened. "I'm warning you, Elliot. If you mess this up and we lose her, I will make your life very difficult." Back at the penthouse that evening, Elliot found Max and Layla working on an art project. His son's face was lit up with joy as Layla helped him create what looked like a solar system model. "Daddy," Max called out, "look what we made. Layla says we can hang it in my room." That's great, son." Elliot watched as Max carefully added glitter to what looked like Saturn's rings. "Ms. Grant, could we talk for a moment?" In the kitchen, Elliot struggled to find the right words. "About Saturday, perhaps it would be better if you didn't—" "Mr. Barrington," Layla interrupted, "I meant what I said. I'm coming to that tournament, not because you invited me, and certainly not to provide entertainment for your friends." She smiled slightly. "I'm coming because sometimes people need to learn that their assumptions about others say more about them than about the people they're judging. You don't understand. These people, they can be cruel." "Oh, I understand perfectly. What you don't understand is that I stopped caring about what people like that think of me a long time ago." She turned back to Max. "Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a Jupiter to paint." That night, after Layla had gone home, Elliot sat in his home office staring at his phone. The group chat was still buzzing with jokes about Saturday, but for the first time, he didn't find them funny. He opened his laptop and searched for Pine Valley Country Club course layout. If Layla was determined to go through with this, the least he could do was prepare her for what she'd face. But as he clicked through the photos of the exclusive course, another search caught his eye. Lea Grant, golf champion. What he found made him nearly drop his whiskey glass. There, dated 15 years ago, was a photo of a younger Layla holding a state championship trophy. The caption read, "Local teacher wins. Amateur tournament dedicates victory to late father." Elliot sat back in his chair, a mix of emotions washing over him. He'd just handed his friends exactly what they wanted, a show, but it wasn't going to be the one they were expecting. As he turned off his office lights, he caught sight of the solar system model Max had made. His son's words from earlier echoed in his mind. "Layla says sometimes the best surprises come from people we underestimate." Saturday was going to be interesting indeed. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for golf. Elliot paced his penthouse, checking his phone every few minutes. He hadn't told anyone about discovering Layla's golf background, and he still wasn't sure whose side he was on. The elevator dinged and Layla stepped out with Max. She wore a simple but elegant white golf outfit that somehow looked both professional and stylish. Max ran to his father, excited about spending the day at the club. "Ready for today?" Elliot asked, studying Layla's calm expression. "Always," she smiled, adjusting her golf visor. "Should be an interesting day." They took Elliot's Ferrari to Pine Valley Country Club, Layla sitting in back with Max. As they pulled up to the clubhouse, photographers from several society magazines snapped pictures. James Preston was waiting at the entrance, his smile turning predatory when he saw Layla. "Elliot, and this must be the famous nanny we've all heard so much about." James's voice dripped with fake warmth. "Lea Grant," she introduced herself, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for having me." "Oh, the pleasure is all ours," James smirked. "I hope you've played golf before. This course can be quite challenging for beginners." "I've played a few times," Lea said simply. More of Elliot's friends gathered around, poorly hiding their amusement. Their wives whispered behind their hands, eyeing Leila''s outfit with mock concern. "Daddy, can I show Lea the putting green?" Max tugged at his father's sleeve. "Please?" Before Elliot could answer, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Amanda had arrived, looking stunning in designer golf wear, but instead of joining in the subtle mockery, she walked straight to Lea and gave her a warm hug. "I'm so glad you could make it," Amanda said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Max hasn't stopped talking about you." The crowd's whispers turned confused. This wasn't part of the plan. Amanda was supposed to help put the nanny in her place, not welcome her. "Mrs. Chase," one of the society wives called out, using Amanda's new married name. "Your son's nanny is joining the tournament." "Of course she is," Amanda replied smoothly, "and I hear she's quite good." Elliot watched as his ex-wife linked arms with Lea and led her toward the clubhouse, leaving their audience stunned. Max followed, practically bouncing with excitement. "What's going on, Elliot?" James demanded. "This was supposed to be entertaining." "Maybe it will be," Elliot muttered. "Just not the way you expected." Inside the clubhouse, the tournament pairs were being announced. Normally, these charity events were carefully orchestrated to put together people of similar social standing. Everyone waited to see who would be stuck with the nanny. The club president, Harold Montgomery, an elderly man who'd ruled Pine Valley's social scene for decades, studied his list. And in the next group, Lea Grant and... He paused, adjusting his glasses. "Well, this is interesting. Me." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Playing with Harold was considered the highest honor at these events. He was known for his strict standards and had been known to make or break social careers with his opinion. "But sir," James protested, "surely there's been a mistake. Ms. Grant is, well, she's just a nanny." Harold's bushy eyebrows rose. "Just a nanny, young man. Do you know who you're talking about?" He turned to Lea. "I played against your father in the state championships. Must have been 30 years ago now. Finest golfer I ever met. And if I remember correctly, his daughter wasn't bad either." The silence that followed was deafening. Elliot looked at Lea, who stood quietly, her head held high. "Shall we begin?" Harold offered his arm to Lea. "I've been looking forward to seeing if you play as well as Thomas did." As they walked out to the first tee, Elliot heard Harold say, "You know, your father taught me something important about golf and life. It's not about who you are, it's about how you play the game." The tournament was about to begin, and suddenly everyone realized the joke was on them. Elliot watched as Lea took her place at the first tee, her movements confident and practiced. For the first time since this whole thing started, he felt something he hadn't expected: pride. Max tugged at his sleeve again. "Daddy, is Lea going to show everyone how good she is?" "Yes, son," Elliot replied, finally understanding what was about to happen. "I think she is." The morning sun caught the club head as Lea took her stance. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see if the nanny would embarrass herself. They were about to get the show they came for, just not the one they expected. Leila''s first drive sailed down the fairway long and straight, landing perfectly in the center. The crowd's shocked whispers grew louder. Harold Montgomery nodded approvingly. "Just like Thomas," he said, "your father would be proud." Throughout the morning, Lea played with quiet skill. She didn't show off or celebrate her good shots. She simply played excellent golf. Harold kept pace with her, and their conversation flowed easily. James Preston and his friends watched from the sidelines, their plan backfiring spectacularly. Instead of embarrassing herself, Lea was impressing the most influential member of Pine Valley. "Did you know about this?" James hissed at Elliot between holes. "Would you believe me if I said no?" Elliot watched as Lea sank another perfect. But Max bounced between different groups, proudly telling everyone, "That's my Lea." Amanda stayed close to her son, beaming every time Lea made a good shot. By the time they reached the back nine, Layla and Harold were leading the tournament. The club's regular members had stopped pretending not to watch. Even the waitstaff paused their duties to see her play. "Tell me, my dear," Harold said as they walked to the 16th tee. "Why did you stop competing? With your talent?" "Life had other plans," Layla replied. "After Dad died, someone needed to take care of Mom. Teaching paid the bills, and I discovered I loved it. And now you're a nanny. Now I'm helping a little boy who needs me." She looked over at Max, who was watching her with adoring eyes. "Sometimes the most important victories aren't on a golf course." Elliot, walking nearby, heard every word. Something twisted in his chest. Shame, maybe, or regret for his part in today's intended humiliation. On the 18th hole, with a gallery of spectators gathered around, Layla faced a difficult shot. The green was protected by water on one side and sand on the other. Most players laid up safely, but she took out her 5-iron. "That's a bold choice," Harold commented. "My father always said, play the shot you believe in, not the shot they expect." Layla took her stance. The ball soared high and true, landing softly on the green and rolling to within feet of the pin. The crowd erupted in applause. Even James looked impressed. After they finished, Harold insisted Layla join him for lunch at his private table, the most coveted spot in the clubhouse. Society photographers who had come expecting to document a psychic social disaster now scrambled to capture the unlikely friendship between the club president and the nanny. "I haven't enjoyed a round of golf that much in years," Harold announced to the lunch crowd. "Miss Grant, you must join me again next week." "Oh, I couldn't," Layla started, but Harold waved away her protest. "I insist. You'll be my guest. In fact," he looked around the room, "I think it's time Pine Valley had some fresh perspectives. What would you say to a membership?" The silence that followed was absolute. Pine Valley memberships were almost impossible to get. Even James had been on the waiting list for years. "That's very kind," Layla said carefully, "but I don't think that would be appropriate. I'm here as Max's nanny, nothing more." "Nonsense," Amanda jumped in. "You're family now. Right, Elliot?" All eyes turned to Elliot. He looked at Layla, who had shown more class and character in one day than his society friends had in years. He thought about how she'd transformed his son's life in just a few weeks. "She's right," he said finally. "Mr. Montgomery, if you're offering a membership to—" "Layla, I'd be honored to sponsor it." James choked on his drink. The society wives dropped their forks, and somewhere in the crowd someone started to applaud. That evening, as they drove home, Max fell asleep in the back seat. Elliot kept glancing at Layla in the rearview mirror. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. "About your golf background. Would it have changed anything?" Layla adjusted Max's blanket. "Would you have seen me differently, or would I still have been just the help? I'm starting to think I never really saw you at all." They rode in silence for a while, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "For what it's worth," Elliot said as they pulled up to the penthouse, "I'm sorry about today, about all of it." "I know." Layla smiled slightly. "But sometimes people need to learn their lessons the hard way." As she gathered Max's things, Elliot made a decision. "Have dinner with me." Layla paused. "Mr. Barrington." "Not as your employer, not as Max's father. Just dinner. I'd like to hear about Thomas Grant and the daughter who gave up competitive golf to take care of her family." For a long moment, Layla studied his face. Then very quietly she said, "Maybe, but first you need to understand something. I won't be a charity project or a social experiment. If you want to know me, you need to see me. Really see me." "I'm starting to," Elliot replied, "and I think I like what I see." Max stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about golf and superheroes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, in the quiet of the evening, something had shifted between them. The question was, were they both ready for what that meant? The news about Layla's golf triumph spread quickly through New York's elite social circles. The story of the nanny who outplayed everyone at Pine Valley became the talk of the town. But inside the Barrington penthouse, bigger changes were taking place. Elliot found himself looking forward to mornings, not just because Max's tantrums had disappeared, but because of the quiet moments when he'd watch Layla and his son together over breakfast. "Mr. Barrington," Layla said one morning, We need to talk about Max's birthday next week. Elliot looked up from his phone. He'd almost forgotten. Usually Amanda handled the parties, turning them into society events that were more about impressing adults than making a 5-year-old happy. I thought we could do something different this year, Layla suggested. Something just for Max. What did you have in mind? He's been talking about space non-stop since our museum visit. The planetarium offers private shows for children's parties. No fancy catering or society photographers, just Max and his actual friends learning about stars and having fun. The old Elliot would have dismissed the idea immediately, but the old Elliot hadn't watched his son bloom under Layla's care. Done, he said. Whatever Max wants. That afternoon, James Preston stormed into Elliot's office unannounced. Have you lost your mind? James threw a society magazine on Elliot's desk. The cover showed Layla and Harold Montgomery laughing together at Pine Valley. First the golf tournament. Now I hear she's getting a membership. She's the help, Elliot. Is that what this is really about, James? Or are you just angry that she showed you up? Don't tell me you're falling for her act. What's next, making her the new Mrs. Barrington? Elliot stood up slowly. I think you should leave. She's changing you, James accused. The Elliot I know would never, maybe the Elliot you know needed changing. After James left, Elliot sat staring at the magazine cover. Layla's smile looked genuine, unlike the practiced poses of his society friends. When had he started noticing things like that? His phone buzzed. A message from Amanda. Lunch tomorrow? We need to talk about you and Layla. The next day, at their usual restaurant, Amanda got straight to the point. You're falling for her. That's ridiculous, Elliot protested. She works for me. Please, Amanda rolled her eyes. I know that look. I used to hope you'd look at me that way. She reached across the table. It's okay, you know, to want something real for once. It's not that simple. Because of what people like James will say? Since when do you care about their opinions? Since they control half my business contacts. Amanda sat back. The old Elliot would say that, but is that who you want to be anymore? Before he could answer, his phone lit up with a text from Layla. Max got an A on his science project. He can't wait to show you. Amanda watched his face soften as he read the message. That's what I thought, she said quietly. Don't mess this up, Elliot. Some things are worth more than social standing. That evening, Elliot came home early to find Max and Layla on the balcony with a telescope. Daddy, we're looking at Jupiter, Max exclaimed. Layla says it has 79 moons. Elliot joined them, letting Max explain everything he'd learned. The city lights sparkled below, but his son was focused on the stars above. This is what childhood should be, Layla said softly. Wonder and discovery, not social obligations. I'm beginning to see that. Elliot watched her help Max adjust the telescope. About dinner, Mr. Barrington. Elliot, he interrupted. Please, at least when we're not working. Layla was quiet. For a moment. Elliot, she said finally, testing the name. This is complicated. Life usually is, but maybe that's not always bad. Max called them over, excited about finding another constellation. As they stood together under the stars, Elliot realized something. He'd spent his life collecting expensive things, but the most valuable moments were the simplest ones. His phone buzzed again. More messages from James and the society crowd, probably with opinions about his choices. For the first time in his life, Elliot let them go unanswered. Some changes, he was learning, were worth the risk. Max's birthday party at the planetarium was a huge success. 20 kids sat mesmerized as stars danced across the dome above them. While Max proudly explained constellations to his friends, no photographers, no society parents, no drama, just pure childhood joy, until James Preston showed up uninvited. Elliot, he called out, his voice echoing in the darkened space. We need to talk, now. Layla moved protectively closer to Max, who was too absorbed in the show to notice the interruption. Elliot followed James outside. The board is concerned, James said without preamble. Your behavior lately. It's affecting investor confidence. My behavior? You mean spending time with my son? I mean throwing away your social standing for a nanny. James pulled out his phone. Look at these photos. The images showed Elliot, Max and Layla at various places around the city, the park, the museum, even getting ice cream. Normal family activities, but the tabloid headlines told a different story. Billionaire's social decline, and has Barrington lost his mind? Your biggest investors are from our social circle, James reminded him. They're starting to question your judgment. My judgment has never been better. Really? Then explain this. James showed him another headline. Barrington Empire stocks drop 10% amid CEO's lifestyle changes. Elliot felt his stomach clench. 10% was significant. It's all connected, Elliot. Your reputation, your business, your future. Are you really willing to risk everything for her? Inside, the children were cheering as a meteor shower played across the dome. Elliot could hear Max's excited voice explaining to his friends how shooting stars weren't really stars at all. The board is meeting Monday, James continued. They want to discuss your situation. Fix this or they might fix it for you. After James left, Elliot stood alone in the hallway. Through the door, he could hear Layla leading the kids in a countdown to a supernova display. Max's laughter echoed off the walls. That evening after the party, Layla found Elliot in his home office. The kids had an amazing time, she said. Max is still talking about... She stopped, noticing his expression. What's wrong? The board meeting. On Mondays, they're concerned about the company's image. You mean they're concerned about me? Layla, I don't. She held up her hand. I knew this would happen eventually. The fairy tale always ends, doesn't it? It doesn't have to, doesn't it? Your whole world is about image and money. I was naive to think that could change. You did change it, Elliot stood up. You changed everything. But not enough. Layla's voice was soft but firm. I won't be. The reason your company fails. I won't let Max lose his father's legacy. So what do we do? You know what has to happen. I'll finish out the week, help Max adjust. No. Elliot moved closer. I've spent my life choosing image over substance. Not this time. Elliot, be realistic. Your whole life is tied to that world. Maybe it's time for a new world. He reached for her hand. Stay. Not as the nanny. Not as a social experiment. Stay. Because Max needs you, because I... The elevator dinged and Amanda burst in. Turn on the TV now. The local news was running a special report. Breaking news, Barrington Empire in crisis. Secret board meetings reveal potential takeover. James, Elliot muttered. He's making his move. It gets worse, Amanda said. They're painting Layla. As a gold digger who's destroying the company, the story's everywhere. Layla watched the coverage, her face pale but composed. I should go. Running away won't fix this, Amanda said sharply. They'll still use it against Elliot. You need to... Fight back? How? By showing them who you really are. Amanda turned to Elliot. Both of you, stop hiding. Max appeared in the doorway, clutching his new telescope. Why is everyone fighting? Layla and Elliot exchanged looks. Whatever they decided would affect not just them, but this little boy who'd finally found stability. No one's fighting, sweetheart, Layla said, but Max was old enough to know better. Are you leaving? His lower lip trembled. Like Mommy did. The room fell silent. In that moment, the choice became crystal clear. No, Elliot said firmly. No one's leaving. Because some things are worth fighting for. The news continued to play in the background, but no one was watching anymore. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight in this room, a family was choosing to stand together. The question was, would love be enough to withstand what was coming? Monday morning arrived, with a media circus outside the Barrington building. Reporters swarmed as Elliot's car pulled up, but they weren't expecting who stepped out with him. Layla, dressed in a professional blue suit, walked confidently beside him. The cameras went crazy. Mr. Barrington, is it true you're being forced out? Ms. Grant, are you behind the company's downturn? Inside the lobby, Harold Montgomery was waiting. Quite an entrance, he said approvingly. Ready to shake things up? The boardroom was packed. James Preston sat at the head of the table, already looking victorious. The other board members whispered among themselves. What is she doing here? James demanded as Layla entered with Elliot. I invited her, Harold said, taking his seat. As Pine Valley's largest shareholder, his presence changed everything. I think we all need to hear the truth, James recovered quickly. The truth? Fine. Let's talk about how Barrington Industries has lost millions since Ms. Grant entered the picture. How our CEO has abandoned his responsibilities. Actually, Amanda interrupted, walking in with a stack of files, let's talk about who's really been manipulating the company's stock. She dropped the files on the table. My new husband's forensic accounting firm found some interesting transactions. Secret meetings with competitors, suspicious stock trades, all traced back to you, James. The room erupted in chaos. James turned. Pale? You were shorting your own company's stock, Elliot realized, creating scandal to drive the price down. You can't prove anything. But I can, Harold said calmly. Did you really think I invited Layla to golf just for her swing? I needed to understand what kind of person she was. Instead, I learned what kind of person you are. Security arrived to escort James out. As he passed Layla, he snarled, You don't belong in this world. Maybe this world needs to change, she replied. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence as Harold laid out the evidence of James's manipulation. The stock drops, the leaked stories, the orchestrated social backlash, all part of his plan to seize control. So, Elliot addressed the board, shall we talk about the company's real future? Hours later, after the dust had settled and the press had been given a very different story than they expected, Elliot found Layla in his office. You didn't have to come today, he said. Yes, I did. Running away never solves anything. She smiled. My father taught me that, along with golf. Harold knew about James. He suspected. That's why he took such an interest in us. He wanted to see if you were ready to stand up for what matters. Elliot took her hand. And am I? Getting there. His phone buzzed. Amanda sending a photo of Max at school, proudly showing his friends a newspaper with the headline, Barrington CEO and former golf champion save company from hostile takeover. Former golf champion, Elliot mused. You're full of surprises. Life usually is. Layla squeezed his hand. The question is, what do we do now? The answer would have to wait. Caroline burst in with urgent news. Sir, Ms. Grant's mother is here, and she's talking to the press. Layla froze. What? Through the window they could see an elegant older woman holding court with reporters, the headline scrolling across the news ticker read, Elizabeth Grant reveals family's hidden fortune. Is the Nanny story a lie? Mom, Layla whispered. What is she doing? The story was far from over. Elizabeth Grant stood in the Barrington building lobby, every inch the socialite she'd once been. Of course I'm proud of my daughter, she told the reporters. But this narrative about her being a simple nanny, that's not the whole story. Layla rushed downstairs, Elliot close behind. Mum, what are you doing? Darling, Elizabeth embraced her daughter. I couldn't let them paint you as some Cinderella story. The Grants were one of Boston's finest families before your father's death. That was a long time ago. But the trust fund isn't. $20 million, just waiting for you to claim it. Elizabeth turned to the cameras. My daughter chose to work rather than live off her inheritance. Admirable, isn't it? The reporters went wild. Elliot stood frozen, processing this new information. Is this true? He asked Layla. The money exists, she admitted, but I never wanted it. That world took my father from us. All the social obligations, the pressure to maintain appearances. He was on his way to another charity event when he had his heart attack. Elizabeth's face tightened. We don't discuss that. Maybe we should. Maybe it's time for the whole truth. Back in Elliot's office, mother and daughter faced each other. Amanda arrived to watch Max, who could sense the tension. Why now, Mom? Layla demanded. Because you're making the same mistake I did, Elizabeth said, falling for a man whose life revolves around social status. Elliot is nothing like Dad's friends. No? Then why did he invite you to that golf tournament? To show you off? To humiliate you? Elliot stepped forward. You're right. I did invite her for the wrong reasons, but Layla showed me what really matters. Pretty words, Elizabeth scoffed. But when the board pressures you again, when your society friends whisper about her, they won't, Amanda interrupted, because they're about to learn that Layla Grant has more class and integrity than all of them combined. The trust fund, Layla said quietly. I want to donate it, all of it. What? Elizabeth gasped. That's your inheritance. No, it's the money that killed Dad. And I'm giving it to the Children's Hospital to build a new science and education center. The room fell silent. Even Max looked up from his toys. You can't, Elizabeth whispered. Watch me. Layla turned to Elliot. Will you help me set it up? Elliot took her hand. Whatever you need. Elizabeth sank into a chair. I was trying to protect you. This world, it takes everything. Only if you let it, Layla said softly. Dad taught me that happiness isn't in bank accounts or country club memberships. It's in moments like teaching a child about stars or helping someone find their strength. Tears rolled down Elizabeth's cheeks. You sound just like him. Then maybe it's time we both honored his memory properly. The media was still camped outside, hungry for the story, but up in that office, something more important was happening. A family was healing, and a woman was choosing her own path. Max tugged at Layla's sleeve. Does this mean you're staying? Yes, she smiled, looking at Elliot. I'm staying. Elizabeth watched her daughter, really seeing her for the first time in years. Your father would be so proud, she whispered. Outside, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of possibility. The headlines tomorrow would tell one story, but the truth was much simpler. Love in all its forms was worth more than any inheritance. 1 year later, Pine Valley Country Club was hosting another charity tournament. But this time, things were different. The event wasn't just about golf. It was the grand opening of the Thomas Grant Science Center at Children's Hospital, funded by Layla's donated trust fund. Children from the hospital's long-term care unit were special guests, learning about golf from volunteer instructors. Look, Layla, Max called out, helping a young patient line up a putt. Just like you taught me. Layla watched proudly as her now 6-year-old student became the teacher. Beside her, Elizabeth Grant wiped away tears. Thomas would have loved this, she said softly. Using golf to help children heal. Elliot approached them, looking relaxed, in casual golf wear, no designer labels in sight. The hospital board just voted. The science program is approved for all children's hospitals in our network. The past year had brought many changes. Barrington Industries had shifted its focus, with education and healthcare becoming major priorities. The society pages still gossiped, but now they wrote about the company's charitable work instead of its parties. Harold Montgomery joined them, leaning on his golf club. James Preston's sentencing is tomorrow, he reminded them. The SEC found even more evidence of fraud. Good riddance, Amanda said, arriving with her husband. She was pregnant now, and Max was excited about becoming a big brother to his new half-sibling. Daddy, Max ran over. Can I show everyone my science project? Please, Elliot grinned. Go ahead, son. Max pulled out a small robot he'd built at school. The same school where Layla had once taught, where she now ran a new STEM program funded by the Barrington Foundation. And this part, Max explained to his captive audience, is what makes it... Move on, Mars. Mars? Harold chuckled. We're going to live there someday, Max said confidently. Right, Layla. Anything's possible, she smiled, catching Elliot's eye. They both wore simple gold bands now. The wedding had been small, just family and close friends. No society photographers, no drama. Elizabeth touched the locket she always wore, the one with Thomas's picture. He always said golf was like life. It's not about the score, it's about how you play. And who you play with, Elliot added, wrapping an arm around Layla. A young patient tugged at Layla's sleeve. Ms. Grant Barrington, can you teach me that? Swing again. Of course, sweetheart. Layla knelt down, positioning the child's hands on the club. The secret is to believe in yourself. As the sun set over Pine Valley, families gathered on the lawn. Children from the hospital played alongside. Club members' kids, no distinctions made. The old social barriers had fallen, replaced by something more genuine. You know, Amanda said to no one in particular, sometimes the best families are the ones we build ourselves. Max was showing his robot to a group of patients, his face glowing with pride. Elizabeth and Harold sat sharing stories about Thomas, and Elliot watched his wife teaching a child to golf, remembering how it all began, with a nanny interview and a tantrum over shoes. "Ready to head home?" he asked Layla later as the event wound down. "Home," she repeated, smiling. "Remember when you thought I didn't belong in your world?" I was wrong. We built our own world. They gathered Max, who was tired but happy, his robot clutched to his chest. The child who once threw tantrums now spent his time helping others and dreaming of Mars. As they walked to their car, not the Ferrari, but a sensible family vehicle, Max asked, "Can we look at the stars tonight?" "Always," Layla promised. The media had labeled it a modern fairy tale, The Billionaire and the Nanny, but they'd missed the real story. It wasn't about social status or inherited wealth. It was about a little boy who needed love, a woman who stayed true to herself, and a man who learned that real happiness couldn't be bought. Above Pine Valley, the first stars began to appear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dreams, new chances to make a difference, but tonight, under the same sky where a father once taught his daughter about golf and life, a family headed home together. Some people said Elliot Barrington had lost his edge, trading social status for simple happiness. But as he looked at his wife and son pointing out constellations through the car window, he knew the truth. He hadn't lost anything. He'd finally found everything that mattered. The end.